For more reactions from the United States, we are now joined live by Dan Kovalik. Dan is a human rights and labor lawyer, and he is also the author of the forthcoming book, The Plot to Overthrow Venezuela. This book includes a foreword written by Oliver Stone. Thank you so much for speaking with us, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Are you surprised by anything we've witnessed today happening in Venezuela, and what's your reaction?
I guess I'm not surprised. I think, as Tariq Ali pointed out, the U.S. is now desperate to carry out this coup against Maduro. I think that as far as the people in the White House are concerned, they've reached a point of no return, and they will stop at nothing to overthrow the duly elected government in Venezuela. Of course, I'm quite alarmed by what's happening. What happened on the ground today, according to my friends, seemed frankly anticlimactic, but I fear that there are greater plans afoot, including this plan by Eric Prince of formerly of Blackwater, now of another mercenary company, to send 5,000 mercenaries to Venezuela. And I think that that is probably a real possibility that that's going to happen. So, I mean, it's of grave concern. It should be grave concern to everyone in the hemisphere. This is the Monroe Doctrine back in progress, and it must be resisted, including by people in the United States.
Yeah, and as we've mentioned, you have a new book coming out called The Plot to Overthrow Venezuela. From what you've seen, when did these plots against the Bolivarian government actually begin?
Well, truthfully, they began right after Chavez was elected. Let's remember, Chavez was elected in 1998. He was inaugurated in 1999. And by 2002, by the way, he ran for office again in 2000 under the new constitution that the people ratified. And by 2002, there was a coup that was successful for a couple days that the U.S. had supported, in which Chavez was kidnapped, taken to a military island, and, almost killed. Until the people came down from the poor barrios to demand his return. So, and that was followed by management-run oil strikes that the U.S. supported, of course, numerous rounds of sanctions against Venezuela, beginning under Obama, and really continuing and accelerating under Trump. There was this report that just came out by CEPR, by Mark Weisbrot, and Jeffrey Sachs, showing that over 40,000 Venezuelans have been killed by the sanctions that Trump imposed in August 2017, and that more people will die this year due to even increased sanctions. So, I mean, this war against Venezuela has been going on now for 20 years. In various forms, but now we see a real intensification to the point of a possible, military intervention.
And now let's talk about the U.S. Not far from where you are, Venezuela's embassy in Washington is facing hostility from supporters of the opposition and even law enforcement. What sort of solidarity with Venezuela have you seen from movements or activists around the U.S.?
Yes, well, incredible solidarity. There have been people living in the Venezuelan embassy to defend it on behalf of the legitimate government of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, trying to prevent opposition figures who have no standing to be in that embassy from getting in the embassy. And it's been going on now for a couple weeks, and it's really inspiring. They've been holding events, many evenings, public events, and again, really holding down the fort. And this is an amazing act of solidarity. They're risking being arrested and forcibly removed from there. That could happen any moment. And it really should be supported.
So you know a lot about the situation in other countries of Latin America. From your experiences and solidarity work over the years, can you tell us how these coup attempts compare to the scenarios we've seen in places like Nicaragua and Cuba, for example?
Well, they look a lot like things we've done to countries like Cuba and Nicaragua. Of course, Cuba has been under an embargo now for decades by the United States. Trump is now entering a new phase with that, in which he's going to increase the embargo against Cuba. The same thing with Nicaragua was with the U.S. tried to economically strangle it, particularly in the 1980s, and of course ran the Contra War against Nicaragua, sometimes illegally because Congress had cut off aid, and we have to remember that it was Elliott Abrams who's one of the key figures involved in the illegal sales of weapons to the Contras. He is now in charge of U.S. policy towards Venezuela. But the example that really comes to mind is that of Chile in the early 1970s, in which the U.S. Again strangled the economy. There was a blackout at that time as well in Chile. And ultimately, Salvador Allende, the duly elected president, was overthrown in a military coup, as we know, on September 11th, 1973. They are trying to run that same game plan now in Venezuela. I think it's harder to do because the Venezuelan Bolivarian Revolution has now existed for 20 years. It's very strong, has a lot of support. We have to recall Allende had only been president for 3 years. And also there was a military there that was quite disloyal, obviously. I mean, that's a nice way to put it. And the army led the coup. In Chile, it looks like that's not going to happen in Venezuela. And so, you know, the fear that many of us have is that the U.S. may turn to direct intervention, sending troops in like they did in the Dominican Republic. In 1965, like they did in 1989 in Panama. People forget about that, where they overthrew the Noriega government because Noriega wouldn't allow Panama to be used as a base of operations, again, for the Contras, the Nicaraguan Contras, and in the process killed what's estimated to be between 400 and 4,000 people in Panama. And so, you know, the U.S. is quite, ready to intervene where it wants to. I think it would be a disastrous conflict in Venezuela if the U.S. chose to do that. But, in fact, it would be crazy. But, the truth is, let's face it, our government is being run by madmen. I mean, it's the only way you can put it. And so we have to be afraid that they might try something like some sort of intervention like this Eric Prince, formerly of Blackwater, is calling for.
Yeah, and lastly, Dan, what do you think we'll see tomorrow as the opposition has been calling for large mobilizations? Do you think they have something else planned?
Well, there's got to be other things planned. This, again, what happened today seemed like more of a beginning of the process of a larger military operation against Venezuela. So certainly there will be more to come. We're also up against May Day. There's going to be May Day celebrations in Venezuela, which will be pro-government. And so those could happen alongside the opposition protests as well. And I'm certain the opposition will try to gin up some sort of false flag situation to justify an intervention. Those are the things we need to look for, but we can't be taken in by it like we have before. We have to realize that this is an orchestrated coup that's happening. It's illegal, it's immoral, and it's time for people to show solidarity with Venezuela.
Dan, we thank you so much for your time for Telesur English.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We had been speaking with Dan Kovalik. He's a human rights and labor lawyer, and he's also the author of a forthcoming book, The Plot to Overthrow Venezuela.